The last thing my mother ever gave me wasn't money. It was a folder, sealed with packing tape, sitting in a lawyer's filing cabinet for 11 months before anyone opened it. By the time we did, my stepfather had already told the whole county he'd won. He hadn't. I'm Grant Whitmore. I'm 47 years old. I run a small contracting business out of Staunton, Virginia, and I have spent most of my life being the guy who keeps things calm. That's not a compliment. That's a confession. I let a man walk into my mother's house 9 years ago and slowly take over every decision in her life, and I told myself I was being respectful of her choice. Welcome to Dad's Pure Revenge. If you're new here, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Hit that subscribe button and stick with me, because this one still doesn't feel real to me, even though I lived it. My mother's name was Eleanor. Everybody in Staunton called her Ellie Pruitt, even after she remarried, because Pruitt Hardware and Feed had been on Route 11 since her own father built the counter with his hands in 1961. She ran that store for 30 years. She knew every contractor in 3 counties by their first name and their kids' names too. When my dad passed when I was 22, she didn't fall apart. She opened the store the next morning at 7 like always, because she said the men who needed lumber on a Tuesday didn't stop needing lumber just because she was grieving. She was the kind of woman who'd notice if you looked tired before you'd said a word. When Connie Alvarez, the home health aide who started coming around after Mom's first fall, mentioned once, just in passing, that her own car had a bad transmission, my mother had it fixed at Deacon's garage 2 towns over and told Connie the shop was running a promotion. There was no promotion. Connie found out a year later and cried in my mother's kitchen. That was who she was. She gave things away and then lied about it so you wouldn't feel like you owed her anything. She married Roland Vance when I was 38. I liked him fine at first. He was quiet, a retired insurance adjuster, drove a clean gray Buick, always shook my hand a little too firm. He moved into her house on Beverly Ford Road, and within a year, he was the one answering her phone, the one at her doctor's appointments, the one who told me not to worry about the store's bookkeeping because he used to do numbers for a living. Here's my honest mistake, the one I still think about. I let him. I stopped asking to see the store's ledgers. I stopped double-checking the insurance paperwork he filed for her. I told myself I was respecting her marriage, respecting her right to run her own life. What I was actually doing was avoiding an uncomfortable conversation, and I let that avoidance go on for years. Tuesday, March 3rd, 6:14 in the morning. My phone rang. It was Connie. "Grant, you need to come now. Your mom's not responding right." I was in the driveway in 4 minutes, still in the shirt I'd slept in. By the time I got to Beverly Ford Road, the ambulance was already pulling out. St. Agnes Regional, 22 minutes away. I called Roland twice on the drive. No answer. I called a 3rd time from the hospital parking lot. He picked up on the 4th ring, and I could hear a television in the background. "She's stable," he said, before I'd even finished asking. "The nurse called me already. Are you coming?" There was a pause, not a long one, just long enough. "I've got a thing this morning I can't move. I'll swing by later." Then, quieter, almost bored. "That's not really my problem to solve right now, is it?" I stood in that parking lot for a second, not understanding what I'd just heard. My mother had had a stroke. He'd been married to her for 9 years, and he was talking about a thing, like the woman who'd built a life for him wasn't lying in a hospital bed with a tube in her arm. Connie was already there when I walked in. She'd driven herself, off the clock, still in her scrubs from a different client. She held my mother's hand and talked to her low and steady the whole first hour, telling her which of her hydrangeas were about to bloom, like Mom could hear every word. Maybe she could. Connie did that every single day for the next 6 weeks. Never once did she ask to be paid for the extra hours. She just kept showing up, with a thermos of chamomile tea, steeped exactly the way my mother liked it. 4 minutes, no more. Roland came by twice. He stood near the door both times, checked his watch, and left before visiting hours ended. My mother died on a Thursday in April. 4:51 in the afternoon, with Connie holding one hand and me holding the other. Roland was at the house. He said later he didn't want to remember her that way. I noticed things at the funeral I didn't examine right then. I noticed Roland had already had new business cards printed, Pruitt Hardware and Feed, with his name under owner, and he handed one to the funeral director like it was a normal thing to carry in your jacket at your wife's burial. I told myself grief does strange things to people. I filed it away instead of looking at it straight on. 3 weeks later, at the reading of the will, Denise Okafor, my mother's attorney for over a decade, read out the standard division. The house went to Roland, as expected, since Mom had put it in both their names when they married. But the store, the business, the accounts tied to it, those were still in my mother's name alone. Denise read the line where Mom left it to me. Roland didn't raise his voice. He never did. He just looked at Denise and said, flat as a countertop, I want the estate, the business, everything. Denise told him plainly that wasn't what the will said. He said he'd contest it. He said he had 30 years invested in that marriage, and he wasn't walking away with a house and a Buick. Denise pulled me into her office that same afternoon. She'd handled my mother's affairs a long time, and she looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I told her what I wanted to do. Grant, you don't have to give him anything. The will is clear. Fight this. Give it all to him, I said. She actually stood up out of her chair. You understand what you're saying? The store, the accounts, 30 years of your mother's work. Here's the thing I hadn't told Denise yet, because I hadn't fully let myself believe it. 2 days after the funeral, going through Mom's desk at the store, I'd found a folder taped shut in the bottom of her file cabinet, behind the property tax records, with a sticky note in her handwriting. Denise, only if he asks for it all. I hadn't opened it. I brought it to Denise instead, and asked her to hold it, sealed, until the day came. My mother had known this was coming. She'd known him better than any of us wanted to admit. Everybody who heard I was signing everything over to Roland thought I'd cracked. My wife, Michelle, sat me down at our kitchen table and asked me straight if I was doing this out of guilt. My own daughter, 17 at the time, asked me why I was letting that man win. I didn't have a clean answer for any of them. All I could say was, Mom asked me to trust her on this one, and I'm going to. The final hearing was set for a Tuesday in June, 9 o'clock sharp, at the Augusta County Courthouse. In the 6 weeks leading up to it, Roland's calls to Denise's office climbed. 11, then 19, then 34, then 38, checking, pushing, making sure nothing had changed. He had no idea what was sitting in that folder. He would. I remember the morning of the hearing clean as a photograph. Overcast sky, the kind that never commits to rain. Roland showed up in a navy suit I'd never seen, hair combed different than usual, like he'd dressed for a promotion instead of a courtroom. His lawyer, a tall man named Preston Kellerman, kept glancing at me with something close to pity, the way you look at a man about to lose his shirt. We sat at the table. Denise slid the transfer documents across to me. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name, Grant A. Whitmore, on the line, and I pushed the papers to Roland's side. He smiled. Not a big smile, a small, satisfied one. The kind of smile a man gives when a thing he'd been owed finally lands in his hand. He signed under his own name without reading past the first page. That's when Denise opened the folder. Before we close this out, she said, calm as anything, there's a supplemental disclosure my client's mother left with this office, to be entered into the record upon any formal claim to full ownership of Pruitt Hardware and Feed. Kellerman's face didn't move at first. Then Denise started reading. My mother, it turned out, had done what I never had. She'd looked at the books. Quietly, over the last 2 years of her life, she'd pulled bank statements herself, cross-referenced them against inventory logs, and found a pattern going back nearly 6 years. Transfers out of the store's operating account into a personal account under Roland's name, disguised as vendor payments to a supplier that, as it turned out, didn't exist. Small amounts at first, then not so small. just over $200,000, moved a little at a time, slow enough that nobody watching the surface numbers would ever notice. She hadn't confronted him. She'd documented it instead. Bank records, a signed statement from the store's actual accountant, confirming the vendor was fictitious, and a letter in her own hand explaining why she never said a word to him while she was alive. "I built something with my own hands," she wrote, and Denise read every line of it out loud in that courtroom. "I won't spend my last years fighting a man I chose to love, but I won't let him think I didn't see him clearly." The store's original ownership agreement, the one her own father had drafted decades earlier, and she'd never bothered to update because she never thought she'd need it, had a forfeiture clause. Any owner or claimant found to have committed fraud against the business automatically forfeited any right to future ownership or proceeds, and became liable for repayment plus interest. Roland had just signed himself into ownership of a business that, under its own governing document, he was now legally barred from owning, and personally on the hook for over $260,000, principal and interest, the moment the fraud was entered into the county record. Kellerman went pale. I watched it happen in real time, the color just draining out of him like someone had pulled a plug. He leaned over and whispered something sharp to Roland, and Roland's satisfied little smile cracked down the middle. "This isn't," Roland started. "It's dated, notarized, and it's already filed," Denise said. "You asked for everything, Mr. Vance. You just signed for it." He didn't shout. He didn't stand up and rage the way you might expect from a man watching his own fortune evaporate. He just sat there very still, staring at the folder, like he was doing the math, and every version of it came out the same. "I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. Not really. Mostly I felt tired, and a little sick, because I was watching my mother's marriage get autopsied in a courtroom in front of strangers. If this is landing for you the way it landed for me, hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and honestly, it means something to hear from you." The judge entered the disclosure into the record. The forfeiture triggered automatically under the original agreement. Roland lost any claim to the store the same afternoon he thought he'd won it, and the county opened a civil matter to recover the missing funds. He kept the house. That was his by contract, and I never tried to touch it. The business reverted to me by default, since I was the named alternate beneficiary the moment his claim failed. I didn't gloat to him. I didn't call him after. He sent one text message, weeks later. "Your mother could have just told me she knew." I never answered it, because I don't think there's an answer that would have satisfied either one of us. She chose silence over 60-some years of marriage worth of confrontation. And honestly, some nights I understand exactly why. And other nights, I wish she'd let me help her carry it, instead of leaving me a folder to open after she was gone. The store is still open. I run it now, alongside my contracting business, more than I ever expected to. Connie stops by most weeks, still in her scrubs sometimes, and I make sure she never has to ask twice for anything again. My daughter asked me once if I regretted saying, "Give it all to him" that day in Denise's office. I told her no. I regret waiting so long to look at what was right in front of me while my mother was alive, to fix it with me instead of alone. I don't know if there's a clean bow on this one. Roland's case is still working through the courts. My mother's name is back on the sign out front, the way it always should have been. Some things don't heal all the way, and I've made my peace with that instead of pretending otherwise. If you've ever had to trust someone you loved, to see clearly what you couldn't, or you've ever kept the peace at a cost you didn't fully understand until it was too late, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe to Dad's Pure Revenge, because there's another one coming, and somebody out there needs to hear it too.